So today we're going to be talking about embracing your power and unpacking your story. And this image right here is the activity that I'm going to walk you through later on, just so you have a sample of what that looks like. It's not going. There we go. These are the things that we're going to go through. We're going to start off with some ground rules for everybody. Then I'll go into who am I and why am I talking about this. Then we'll start talking about your brilliant mind. We'll go into talking about boundaries, personal boundaries, and also boundaries with ourselves. And then we'll go through a demo of that activity that was in the image about how to kind of embrace and unpack your story. And then we'll close it up with some more Q&A and just open it up for dialogue. All right. So this is actually one of my favorite parts, is setting the ground rules. And the first thing for me is that this is a safe space, and that we each contribute to creating the safe space. I'm also not sure where to look. Can you see me if I'm looking here or if I look here?
Is everyone okay with this being recorded?
I'll start with the ground rules again. So first of all, this is a safe space, and each of us contribute to creating this safe space for each other. So can everybody agree that this is a safe space? We're going to hold that space for everybody here. We are very personal and very vulnerable, and we need to feel that we're in a... However you show up today is perfectly okay, and all of you is welcome. I think that there's this idea that we always need to show up perfect and put on our best face. With me, that's not the case. I want you to be who you are, however you are today, and that's perfectly okay with me. The other thing is that there are no wrong questions here. Many times when I speak, people are scared to ask me questions. They're scared that they will trigger me, or they might say the wrong thing, or that something that they say is not politically correct. So just know, ask whatever it is that you want to ask, and we'll work through that language together so that we can reframe those questions for others. But there's nothing off limits to ask me. And if I feel like it's something I don't want to answer, let me be responsible for that, and I'll let you know. That sound good? All right. Here we go. So a little bit about me. My name is obviously Melissa Ann McDaniel. And when I was 20 years old, I was sexually assaulted. There goes a little bit of my bunny. I was a sophomore in college, and I was assaulted by a man who lied to me about everything except for his name. He was actually a serial predator who had done this to somebody prior to me. For years, I went on living like two lives. I led this life of perfection that I thought everybody needed to see and wanted to see. And then I also lived this life behind closed doors where I would cry on my kitchen floor alone because I just couldn't handle the weight of everything that I had gone through. I set out and traveled across the world. I went to Tanzania and met with a spiritual healer, and I feel like that's really where my healing started to happen. I spent some time in Greece, and then I also went on to study holistic leadership in the creative and expressive arts, and I feel like that's where it tied everything together. So in 2018, or kind of the end of 2017, when I saw the hashtag #MeToo swirling around social media, it made me feel less alone. I was like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not alone? Because I was told not to share my story. I could only talk to the attorneys and a counselor. Beyond that, my family said, don't talk about it. This is an embarrassment to the family. I was to blame. And so I needed to hide behind this mask. So I couldn't even say hashtag #MeToo. Like, there was no way. But yet, as I saw the hashtags swirling around, I was happy that I wasn't alone, but I was also sad because I wanted to see the conversation taken further. I wanted to know that I wasn't the only one crying on the kitchen floor. I wanted to know that I wasn't the only one that struggled to build meaningful relationships. And so in 2018, I heard this calling. I don't know where it came from. I can't find a meme, but it said to me, if you do not see her, be her. And I was like, wait a minute. I'm not going to be her. I'm not going to be the one to talk about crying on the kitchen floor. I'm not going to be the one to talk about not being able to build meaningful relationships. And yet it kept calling me. If you do not see her, be her. And so this came to fruition in the form of my first book, Who Will Love Me? A Holistic Approach to Building Meaningful Relationships After Sexual Assault. And you're going to hold yours up. Yay! I self-published this book first, and it hit bestseller a couple times. And then I submitted it to a publisher, which Emily, who's on here, she has the same publisher as me. And they ended up reaching out to me after 2 days of submitting my proposal and said, we need to talk, and we need to talk next week. And within 2 weeks, I was in contract. So Who Will Love Me will hit bookstores in July, which is super exciting. Yay, right? But it's also, in some ways, I have to do my own work and be mindful of my own process, because sometimes it scares me to know that this person is still out there. He is now out of prison. He's been in prison actually multiple times since he assaulted me. And so knowing that my name and my book is going to be in bookstores and airports, and it's kind of a scary thing. So I also do my own work as I'm helping others. This book helped propel me forward to start supporting women in their process. So the tools that are in this book I use when working with women individually and in groups. So that's a little bit about me. Are there any questions before I jump in? So did all of you know that you have a brilliant mind? I see a lot of like, yes, I have a brilliant mind. And your mind helps you tell the stories that you use to survive every freaking day. And some of those stories might still be serving you, and some may no longer be serving you. So one of the stories that I used to tell myself was that I couldn't be vulnerable and I couldn't share. And so I used what I called comedic conversations. So when conversations started to take a turn to be vulnerable and I might have to share how I was actually feeling, I always had a story that was hilarious that could derail any form of vulnerability. So the big one for me is I used to take pigs to the county fair, and I knew how to judge pig butts. And so, right, imagine people are getting all vulnerable and feely, and I'm like, wait a minute, we're not going there. I can't go there. I can't show you any of this. So we're going to talk about pig butts in my fancy little dress in downtown Seattle. Not the best. But at the same time, this served me so well because it made it so I didn't have to be vulnerable. It was like my protection, right? So instead of seeing this as a negative thing, I chose to see it as this beautiful, wonderful thing that was helping protect my heart and my vulnerability. And we'll get to this later on, but I'll talk to you about how that no longer served me and what I did to kind of remove that. Another thing that I think is really common for those who have experienced sexual violence is that feeling of like disgust and dirty and like not being attractive, or nobody would want you. And those were stories that I told myself, and they're really kind of mean stories. But I had to come to a place where I love those stories that I told myself, because those stories also protected me. They protected me from being in relationships that I didn't want to be in. They protected me from, sorry, this thing is buzzing. They protected me from not wanting to do things that I didn't want to do. So instead of being like, oh my gosh, I hate myself, I'm so disgusting, I'd be like, wow, that's freaking awesome. I told myself I was disgusting and it was saving me. So really learning to like reframe for me was huge. And then the biggest piece to your brilliant mind is holding those thoughts with love. If you are telling yourself you're disgusting, which is a really hard place to be in, and it takes a while to get that place, to be in that place of being able to love it, but you can start with baby steps, and I'll show you an activity that's going to help you work through those baby steps. Do you have any questions about this slide before I move on? Oh, there's a puppy. No? Okay. Next, we're going to talk a bit about boundaries. Many times when we talk about boundaries, we're talking about our personal boundaries. And the first thing that comes to mind is like personal space. For many people, like you teach kids about their bubble. I've had kids stand in a hula hoop to practice what their bubble is. Sometimes as we get older and as adults, we start practicing boundaries with parents or grandparents when they're being really ridiculous. But one of the boundaries that people never really talk about is that your boundaries with yourself. When you're telling yourself that you are disgusting and horrible, who sets that boundary to say that's not okay? Do you set it, or do you let yourself keep thinking it? So today we're going to, in this exercise, it'll also show you how to set that boundary and give you a physical boundary to work with. So when you are thinking of your boundaries with others, you also need to prioritize those boundaries with yourself and those stories that you tell yourself, because the stories we tell ourselves impact these boundaries. Do you have any boundary questions? No? Okay. Now we're going to dive into the fun part. Has anybody here done this with me before, the yarn exercise? No? Okay. So what you'll need when you do this, and I'm going to attempt to draw it. I am not an artist by any means, but this isn't about being perfect. This is about showing up for yourself and really doing the work to support you in creating those boundaries and unpack your stories so that you can embrace your power and sit in that power. So something that you can use, this is the yarn that I use. When I write about this in my book, this is the exact ball of yarn that my professor gave me when I learned this activity. I use note cards or Post-its to write on. I'm a big fan, I think because I'm like a big kid, of using like Crayola markers. And then that reminder of love, right? Love is the big ingredient here, because if you're sitting in this space and you have so much negative self-talk that you can't hold those things with love, you're going to have a hard time removing some of these from your space. So let's move the hula hoop. I've got cords here. Let's see. If I stand over here, can you see the paper? Yeah, I see some heads nodding. All right, so I'm going to draw me in here. Yeah, see, I can't even draw a bow. There I am. And what happens with this yarn or your blanket, hula hoop, whatever, you create the boundary of your choice. So you are sitting in this boundary right here. And I've also, I don't know what all of your backgrounds are. I have a lot of clinicians that are starting to use my book in their practice, and they're actually using this, which is really fun to see that evolve. And so here you are in your boundary. You've got your note cards. And one of the things that I was saying earlier, like the word disgusting, is something that I don't really want to sit within here. It's not really serving me well. So I'm literally going to write that on a note card, and I'm throwing it outside of my boundary. Disgusting out here. So now, what is a word that we could replace disgusting with? Like, what is something, does anyone want to give me a word? Or type in a word? It is pretty quiet.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, awesome. So let's put this beautiful in here. They served me really well for a long time, right? Until they didn't. Because I realized I was struggling to build meaningful relationships. And as I was leading two different lives, I couldn't build authentic relationships and not be authentic and vulnerable with people. So those went out here. And for me, something that came in here as like a strength was that vulnerability. Wow, what's if I wrote in her face? Does anybody have any examples? Haley, hi, love. Anybody have an example that they want to share of something that they may have felt? Oh, there's a message. That's awesome. I think Haley was actually in my class with me when I did this years ago.
I was, yeah.
That's so awesome.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Do you use this in your practice too?
I do. I think, being able to redefine a lot of these words and redefine, just the image of who we are all the time, especially working in addiction.
Yeah. I still use this for myself at least probably every other month. And I pull out my markers and I pull out my yarn, and as silly as that may sound, it is so helpful for me, because not only does it give me the visible, like actually putting this stuff out of there that isn't serving me anymore, it lets me sit in that space with the strength, with the power, with the vulnerability, and really see what it's like to have that in my circle. Anybody have any questions about that? No? You're all so quiet. All right.
What that you wanted us to share, Melissa?
I was just curious if you had anything that might be in your circle that we could support you in moving out.
The shame.
The shame? Yeah. Shame is a big one. And how could we reframe that?
Letting me hide too much.
But it's also, that almost sounds kind of negative, right? It's letting me hide too much. How can we frame that to a loving way to say it?
Bring it into like a power. I don't know.
Does anybody have any ideas?
I guess just, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to say, just, I guess, thinking like, how has the shame served you in some way? Because a lot of these things that we think of as negative have a lot of protective qualities and factors that have helped us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have held on to them. So I guess just thinking like, how has it served you or kept you safe in some way?
It comes back with that vulnerability too. And it kind of loops in with that.
Yeah, so it's help protect your vulnerability and helped you keep your space. Yeah. But you see like how different that feels? More positive.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you have one you wanted to share, Chelsea? It can be self-talk. It can also be something that you're hanging on to that somebody else has said to you.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute. I'm having issues.
Okay.
What I realize sometimes is that if I get called a name or something, a while ago that I hold on to, and then that becomes self-talk.
Interesting. Do you mind sharing an example, or are you good?
I don't know. It can just like come from anyone, whether it's like a loved one that you're fighting with, or like a friend that has called you like a name that you don't like, or they said that you were like ugly or you were unloving, like something like that, and you just hold on to it for a really long time. Because to me, like, it's all about connection. So like if someone that I care about is telling me that I'm being unloving or I'm being disgusting or something like that, then I take that as a harder hit, and then it turns into self-talk.
And many times those words that are coming from others are their own internal stuff. Like as hard as it is to not take that personally, I would also take it personally. It's also their own internal stuff that they're working through that's getting projected to you.
So I've had to learn to kind of like have that mindset shift, that it's not me. It's not a projection of myself.
Right. Yeah. It's a projection of themselves. Yeah.
Better the comfortable lie, right?
What was that?
Better the comfortable lie. It's easier for us to accept that we're worthless because that's what we heard all our lives. However, we have to remember that this is learned behavior.
Yeah.
It's this self-talk, this brutal treatment of yourself. It's a learned behavior. It's not our fault.
Right.
It's our light that scares us most, not our darkness.
Absolutely.
So to believe the crap people fill your head full of, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
I'll give you a word. Irrelevant.
Irrelevant. Okay. And how would you think we could spin that? How has been being
It doesn't. Yeah. But I continue to write anyway because I tell myself it's a lie.
Can you explain to me what you mean by irrelevant? Like the connotation of that?
Oh, it just like embracing this life of being an author, and that like, I really have a message to share with the world in my experience of being a survivor myself. And it's really easy to get in the mindset of like, why me? Why does this even matter? What's the point? Like, why am I putting all this work into something? It's not going to do anything anyway. So yeah, a lot of those voices spin, but I try to persevere anyway. And I finished my second book, so hooray.
Yeah, you just finished your second book. So how did you write? Yeah. How did you make that shift for yourself?
A part of it's having just people supporting me. Like numbers are irrelevant. Me coming from the math tutor telling you numbers are irrelevant. It's hard to say, but it's true.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of people who have been supporting me along the way, so that definitely helps.
Right. And I think the neat thing about this call is we have all found each other through Me Too Many Voices. And so this is proof that you are extremely relevant and that your message is necessary and needed right now. So I don't know if that's something that you can hold in your space, but this is something that is extremely relevant and important for all of us. So thank you for the work you're doing and the writing you're doing, and keep writing.
I just started the third book right here, handwriting it.
Nice. The demo that I wanted to share with you and kind of go through how you can reframe and what that reframe does for you and unpacking your story. On the last slide of this, it just has my contact info that I can pull up for you, but are there any questions, anything about really anything that I've shared today? Quiet. Any life questions?
How do you like set those boundaries and not allow some of those more negative words like to come back into your space?
It takes practice. It's something that I have had to do. I've turned this into a regular practice that I use because we have brilliant minds, right? Like we talked about, and that brilliant mind of yours will try to go back there. Your ego wants to take you back. And so it really takes practice. It's taken me a long time to get to the place of liking myself. Because I had those feelings of disgust. I had those feelings of unworthiness. In total transparency, I hypersexualized myself because I thought that that was the only way that men would want me because I was worthless otherwise. And so there were a lot of those things that I had to work through to understand my worth, to understand that that was serving me a purpose that made me feel worthy, that made me feel like I was wanted and desired. And although looking back, like for my mental health, it wasn't serving me that well, but it did serve a purpose. And it was a beautiful thing when I was able to realize what I was doing and make that shift and reframe. But it's not something that happens overnight.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I see you have shame and disgusting on there. I know for myself, after my assault, because of the circumstances surrounding it being drugged, right? I felt crazy. Like my body knew something happened before my mind could catch up to it.
I'm with you. Yep.
I felt crazy. I felt, and this is really harsh, I felt like a whack job.
Mm-hmm.
That I had these images in my mind that I couldn't necessarily tie to reality, but my body knew something happened to me.
Yep.
So I felt crazy.
Yeah.
Or, I felt broken in a sense, right? You hear about the perceptions in society of the people that this happens to, right? And before this happened to me and not being tied to it, I thought there have to be circumstances in place for this to happen and not necessarily, not fully understand or have awareness because it's not something that people talk about openly, that this is purely on the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
So even in my own survivor journey, it was, how did I not see it? How did I not know this person was capable of this?
Yeah.
Right? So I had all of those.
Had those similar things. I was also drugged, although there's no technical evidence. There's plenty of evidence that he had done that to me and other people. And when my body still does the crazy thing where I get triggered and I don't know what is going on. I don't know why it's happening.
Yeah.
Something that still happens. But the way I choose to reframe that for myself is this is my body's way of communicating that it needs some help.
Yeah.
And I am not crazy. This is something that happened to me. And when these things happen, this is my body's calling for help. And that's when I know that I need to step in and do more self-care and really listen to my body. So something that I did that might sound silly, but yet here I am with yarn and markers, is I really used visual journaling. I found that when my body would try to communicate, I didn't have the words to articulate what it was saying. So the words that would come to mind were the words that I know, that I'm crazy and I'm disgusting and I'm a whack job and this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But when I started having those feelings and would draw, and I think I'll grab one of my journals. They're right here. So you can see, like, I am not an artist. In total transparency, like things like this come out. The way with my body changed everything for me.
Right.
And it might seem silly that I'm coloring in my book with my big markers, but having the ability to express myself in a new way was life-changing.
It's helpful because I'm having, the physical pain sometimes when I'm triggered. What I'm learning is what's called a somatic flashback, where your body registers that pain, right? And I journal and I exercise and I do all the stuff my therapist tells me, but I still have these moments where I'm triggered and I'm like, what happened? What did I come in contact with? I can't recall everything from my attack, right? So it's like, let's figure this out. So I definitely have those moments.
Yeah. And those are moments that I don't know that they ever go away, to be honest, like fully go away. And it's these little things that we can do to help it get better. So,
Yeah.
And for you, Melissa?
Yeah.
So, but no one else on this chat knows, I work with individuals with disabilities, and I have a new client who has been sexually assaulted or in the past. And we're having a hard time with her working through that. By no means we're not therapists, but where the support's there, she only trusts a certain amount of people. Have you found that this has worked with different populations, like individuals with disabilities or younger kids or anything like that?
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, I was sharing this with Lauren earlier, 10 years, well, more than 10 years prior to writing my book and doing all of this, I also worked with adults who experience disabilities. And what I found is that a lot of this stuff worked extremely well, especially because they don't communicate in the same way that we communicate always. And so this gave them different outlets to communicate and a different space to be in that is playful and creative. So absolutely.
I've been enjoying all of this. It's
Good.
really getting the, wheels turning and the light bulb moments. So much of what you said, I can really relate to. And I love the idea of creating different words to distract you from the ones that you're used to having pop up in your brain. And I know I'm going to try that.
Are there any other questions or anything? I can pop up my contact info so you can email me and I'll send you the e-copy of my book. I know some of you on here actually already have my book. It's nice to see the familiar faces. Anything else? Questions that come up in the meantime, or if there was a question that you had that you didn't want to ask in front of everybody, feel free to message me privately. That's not a problem at all. Let me figure out how to share again on here.
Share screen at the bottom.
Thank you. All of this tech stuff, I'm supposed to give a keynote speech next month, and they've decided to switch it all to virtual. And I have no idea how this is going to go.
You're doing so good at technical. I remember you, like an hour ago, you told me that you were not great at it. And there have been multiple times that I'm like, what is she talking about? She's like a whiz right now.
No. Cool. Thank you so much.
So much, Melissa, for being on here and for spending this time with us and for being a part of this series and community. I know that we're all very grateful to have you.
Thank you. I'm grateful for all of you too. Excited to make new friends on here.
Yeah. I'll see you again
Thanks,
soon.
Melissa.